Welcome back to another journey through the vast reaches of science fiction. Tonight, we're venturing into the cold darkness between Mars and Jupiter, into a realm where humanity clings to existence on spinning rocks and hollowed-out asteroids. We're exploring life in the belt from the Expanse, a place where every breath is rationed, every drop of water is precious, and where an entire culture has emerged from the harshest conditions humanity has ever faced. Before we drift into the black, if you enjoy these deep explorations of science fiction worlds, hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow. Now, settle in as we unravel what it truly means to be a belter, to live where down points toward the stars, and where survival itself is an act of defiance against the void. The belt isn't a place you'd choose to live if you had options. It's where you end up when Earth has nothing left to offer you, when Mars won't take you, when desperation outweighs fear. Millions of people call the asteroid belt home, scattered across thousands of stations and ships, connected by nothing but shared hardship and the dream that one day the inner planets will stop treating them like a resource to be exploited. This is their story. This is life in the belt. Chapter 1: The Geography of Desperation. To understand the belt, you first need to understand where it is and what that means for the people who live there. The asteroid belt sits between Mars and Jupiter, roughly 2 to 3 astronomical units from the Sun. That's somewhere between 186 million and 279 million miles from the warmth and light that Earth takes for granted. Out here, the Sun is just a bright star, offering little heat and less comfort. The belt isn't a single place. It's a vast region of space containing millions of asteroids, from pebbles to dwarf planets. Ceres Station, the largest settlement in the belt, was built from the dwarf planet Ceres itself. At 946 kilometers in diameter, Ceres was once covered in a 100-kilometer thick layer of ice. That ice, enough water to fill Earth's Indian Ocean, was strip-mined and sent to Earth over generations, leaving behind a hollowed shell that would become home to 6 million people. The engineering required to make Ceres habitable was staggering. Tycho manufacturing and engineering concerns spun up the asteroid, setting it rotating fast enough to create artificial gravity through centripetal force. The surface of Ceres now spins at over 2,000 kilometers per hour, creating a gravity of 0.3 g, just under a third of Earth's gravity. It's enough to keep people from floating away, enough to let liquids pour and objects fall, but not enough to feel normal if you grew up on Earth or Mars. The spin creates other effects too. There's a noticeable Coriolis effect in the lower levels of the station, where the radius is smaller and the rotational velocity creates strange phenomena. Pour a drink on Ceres and you'll watch the liquid curve through the air as it falls, following a path that seems to defy physics, until you remember that you're standing on the inside of a spinning rock, The effect is disorienting for newcomers, nauseating even, but belters grow up with it. They learn to compensate, to predict the curve, to move in ways that account for forces that Earthers never have to consider. Eros Station was another major settlement, built from an asteroid roughly 34 kilometers long and 11 kilometers wide. Shaped like a potato, Eros was more difficult to spin up than the relatively spherical Ceres, requiring higher surface velocities to achieve the same internal gravity. Before its destruction, Eros housed 1.5 million people and served as the belt's entertainment district. Where Ceres was about commerce and industry, Eros was about pleasure and vice. Casinos, brothels, and shooting galleries lined its corridors, offering spacers a place to spend their hard-earned credits on temporary escapes from the grinding reality of belt life. Tycho Station represents a different approach to habitation. Rather than hollowing out an asteroid, Tycho is a massive ring station built around a sphere half a kilometer across. The station contains over 65 million cubic meters of manufacturing and storage space, with 2 counter-rotating habitation rings that house 15,000 workers and their families. Unlike Ceres and Eros, Tycho is mobile, equipped with a capital ship-class fusion reactor and drive system that makes it the largest mobile construction platform in the solar system. But most belters don't live on the major stations. They live on smaller rocks, on ships, in mining facilities carved into asteroids barely large enough to have names. They live in places where a hull breach means instant death, where equipment failure means suffocation, where the margin between survival and catastrophe is measured in hours of air supply and liters of water. These are the forgotten outposts, the prospecting ships, the family-run mining operations that formed the backbone of the belt's economy and culture. The distances involved are almost incomprehensible. Even within the belt, stations can be millions of kilometers apart. Travel between them takes days or weeks, depending on your ship's capabilities and how much fuel you're willing to burn. Communication suffers from light-speed lag, meaning real-time conversations are impossible over long distances. A message from Ceres to a mining ship on the far side of the belt might take 20 minutes to arrive, and another 20 for the response to come back. This isolation shapes belt culture in profound ways, creating communities that are simultaneously connected and utterly alone. The physical environment of the belt is hostile in ways that Earth dwellers can barely imagine. Space is cold, hovering just above absolute zero. Without a heat source, a human body would freeze solid in minutes. But space is also a perfect insulator, meaning that heat doesn't dissipate easily. Ships and stations must carefully balance heating and cooling, managing thermal loads that can swing wildly depending on sun exposure and internal activity. Radiation is a constant threat. Without Earth's magnetic field and thick atmosphere to protect them, belters are exposed to cosmic rays, solar radiation, and the occasional deadly burst from solar flares. Station hulls provide some shielding, but it's never enough. Long-term exposure leads to increased cancer rates, genetic damage, and shortened lifespans. Belters accept this as the price of living in space, but it's a price that compounds over generations. The lack of gravity, or the low gravity of spun-up stations, creates its own set of problems. Human bodies evolved under Earth's 1G of gravity. Remove that constant force and everything changes. Bones lose density, muscles atrophy. The cardiovascular system struggles to pump blood efficiently. Belters who grow up in low gravity develop differently from their Earth and Mars cousins, becoming taller, thinner, with elongated limbs and enlarged craniums. Their bones are brittle, their muscles weak by Earth standards, but they're adapted to their environment in ways that Earthers can never match. This is the geography of the belt. A vast region of space dotted with islands of habitation, connected by ships that burn through the dark, populated by people who've learned to survive where survival should be impossible. It's a frontier in the truest sense, a place where civilization exists on sufferance, where nature is always waiting to reclaim the tiny bubbles of warmth and air that humans have carved out of the void. Chapter 2: The Physiology of Adaptation. The human body is remarkably adaptable, but it wasn't designed for space. Every system, every organ, every cell evolved under the constant pull of Earth's gravity, bathed in the protection of a thick atmosphere and a powerful magnetic field. Take those things away, and the body begins to change. Sometimes in ways that are beneficial for the new environment, often in ways that are simply tragic. Belters are physically distinctive. They stand 2 to 2.5 meters tall, towering over Earthers and even most Martians. But this height comes at a cost. Their bones are thin and brittle, lacking the density that develops under higher gravity. A fall that an Earther might walk away from could shatter a Belter's leg. A punch that would bruise an Earther could break a Belter's jaw. Their skeletons are adapted for low gravity, strong enough to support their bodies in 0.3 G or less, but catastrophically inadequate for anything approaching Earth normal. The elongation isn't limited to height. Belters have longer limbs, longer fingers, longer necks. Their proportions seem wrong to Earth eyes, stretched and attenuated like figures in a funhouse mirror. Their heads are larger. Relative to their bodies, their craniums expanded to accommodate brains that developed without gravity's constant compression. They move differently, too, with a grace that comes from growing up in low gravity, able to control their momentum in ways that seem almost supernatural to those raised in gravity wells. But the most significant changes are internal. The cardiovascular system of a Belter is fundamentally different from an Earther's. On Earth, the heart must constantly fight gravity to pump blood upward to the brain. This creates a robust cardiovascular system, capable of handling significant stress. In low gravity, that constant resistance disappears. The heart doesn't need to work as hard, so it doesn't develop the same strength. Blood pressure is lower, circulation is less efficient, and the entire system becomes optimized for an environment where up and down are relative concepts. This adaptation has severe consequences. A Belter who travels to Earth experiences what amounts to torture. Their heart, which has never had to pump against 1 G of gravity, suddenly must work 3 times harder than it's capable of. Blood pools in their legs. Their brain becomes starved of oxygen. Their vision blurs and darkens. Within minutes, most Belters would lose consciousness. Within hours, they would die, unless placed in a specialized water suspension tank that distributes the gravitational load across their entire body. The skeletal changes are equally profound. Bones are living tissue, constantly being broken down and rebuilt by specialized cells. This process is regulated by mechanical stress. When you walk, run, or simply stand, your bones experience compression that signals them to maintain or increase their density. In low gravity, that stress is minimal. The bones receive signals that they're overbuilt for the environment, so they begin to shed mass, becoming lighter and more porous. This process, called spaceflight osteopenia, begins within days of entering low gravity and continues throughout a person's life. Belters born in space never develop the bone density that Earthers take for granted. Their skeletons are like chalk compared to the hard wood of Earth bones. This makes them vulnerable to fractures, to compression injuries, to the kind of skeletal damage that can cripple or kill. To combat these effects, Belters rely on a cocktail of medications and treatments. Bone density drugs are administered from childhood, painful treatments that attempt to force bones to maintain mass despite the lack of gravitational stress. These drugs are expensive, often of poor quality and never fully effective. Many Belters can't afford them at all, or can only afford the cheapest versions that come with severe side effects. The result is a population with chronic health problems, with bones that break easily, with bodies that are fragile, despite their adaptation to space. Muscle development follows a similar pattern. Without gravity to provide constant resistance, muscles atrophy. Belters must engage in regular resistance exercise to maintain even basic muscle mass, using elastic bands, weights, or specialized equipment that simulates gravitational load. Those who do hard physical labor, like vacuum welders or dock workers, develop more muscle than the average Belter, but they're still weak by Earth standards. A Belter who arm wrestles an Earther will lose every time, not because they lack technique or determination, but because their muscles simply aren't as dense or powerful. The adaptation extends to the sensory systems as well. Belters develop an acute sense of spatial awareness, able to judge distances and trajectories in 3 dimensions with uncanny accuracy. They can predict how objects will move in low gravity, how momentum will carry them through a corridor, how to catch themselves when they start to drift. This spatial intelligence is something Earthers struggle to develop, their brains too accustomed to the simplified physics of a gravity well. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of Belter physiology is that it's irreversible. A Belter can't simply take some pills and become capable of living on Earth. The changes are too fundamental, too deeply embedded in their development. They're locked into their environment as surely as a fish is locked into water. The inner planets are forever closed to them, not by law or economics, but by biology. This creates a permanent underclass, a population that can be identified at a glance and discriminated against with impunity. Belters are visibly different, and in human societies, visible difference has always been an excuse for prejudice. They're called skinnies by Earthers and Martians, a slur that reduces them to their most obvious physical characteristic. They're seen as weak, as fragile, as less than fully human. The fact that their differences are adaptations to an environment that would kill an Earther in minutes doesn't matter. They're different, and difference is dangerous. Some belters do attempt to mitigate these changes through aggressive medical intervention, bone density enhancement therapy, muscle growth hormones, cardiovascular strengthening drugs. These treatments are expensive and painful, requiring years of commitment and significant financial resources. Even with the best treatments, a belter will never be able to match an Earther's physical capabilities in high gravity. But they might be able to survive a trip to Earth, might be able to walk on Mars without assistance, might be able to expand their world beyond the belt's boundaries. Most belters can't afford these treatments. They're stuck with the bodies they were born with, adapted to an environment that offers no forgiveness for weakness. They live with chronic pain, with bones that ache, with hearts that struggle, with the knowledge that their bodies are slowly failing them. The average belter lifespan is significantly shorter than an Earther's, not because of violence or accidents, though those take their toll, but because of the cumulative effects of living in an environment that humans weren't designed for. Yet despite all this, belters survive. They adapt, they endure, they find ways to thrive in conditions that should be impossible. Their bodies may be fragile, but their spirits are not. They've learned to turn their weaknesses into strengths, to use their height and reach to advantage in zero-G combat, to leverage their spatial awareness in ways that make them superior pilots and engineers. They've become something new, something that's no longer quite human in the Earth sense, but something that's uniquely suited to life in the final frontier. This is the physiology of adaptation, the price and the prize of living in space. Belters have paid for their home with their bodies, trading bone density for the stars, trading cardiovascular strength for freedom from gravity's tyranny. Whether that trade was worth it is a question each belter must answer for themselves, usually while staring at the distant blue dot of Earth and wondering what it would feel like to walk on a planet's surface, to feel real gravity, to breathe air that wasn't recycled through machines. Most will never know. Their bodies have made that choice for them. Chapter 3: The Economics of Scarcity. In the Belt, everything is scarce. Air, water, food, space, privacy, safety. Everything that Earthers take for granted is a precious commodity that must be carefully managed, rationed, and fought over. This scarcity shapes every aspect of Belt life, creating an economy and culture built around the fundamental truth that nothing can be wasted, nothing can be taken for granted, and survival depends on constant vigilance. Water is the most precious resource in the Belt. This seems paradoxical given that many asteroids, including Ceres, were originally covered in ice. But that ice was mined and shipped to Earth over generations, stripped away to feed the inner planet's insatiable thirst. What remains must be carefully recycled and conserved. Every station has water recyclers that process wastewater into potable water, but no recycling system is 100% efficient. There's always loss, always waste that can't be recovered. Over time, this loss adds up, requiring constant replenishment from ice haulers that break apart icy asteroids and bring the precious frozen water back to the stations. The scarcity of water affects every aspect of daily life. Showers are rationed, often limited to a few minutes per week. Belters learn to clean themselves with damp cloths to conserve every drop. Laundry is a luxury, with clothes worn until they're truly dirty rather than just slightly soiled. Public fountains don't exist. The idea of a decorative water feature common on Earth would be seen as obscene waste in the belt. The cost of water creates a visible hierarchy. The wealthy, those who work for the major corporations or have successful businesses, can afford longer showers, cleaner clothes, the luxury of not constantly worrying about their water ration. The poor, the vast majority of belters, live with perpetual thirst, with skin that's always slightly dry, with the knowledge that a broken water recycler could mean death for their entire family. This scarcity is artificial in many ways. There's plenty of water in the solar system. The rings of Saturn are almost pure water ice. Europa, Ganymede, and other moons of Jupiter have more water than Earth. But getting that water to where it's needed requires ships, fuel, and infrastructure. It requires investment from the inner planets, who control the economy and have little incentive to make the belt self-sufficient. Keeping belters dependent on water shipments from Earth and Mars is a form of control, a way to ensure that the belt remains subordinate to the inner planet's interests. Air is similarly precious. Stations and ships maintain their atmospheres through a combination of stored gases and recycling systems. Air recyclers filter and clean the air, removing carbon dioxide and other contaminants. But like water recyclers, they're not perfect. There's always loss, always the need for fresh oxygen to replace what's been consumed or leaked into space. Ships carry compressed oxygen tanks. Stations maintain large reserves. But it's never enough. A hull breach, a recycler failure, a fire that consumes oxygen faster than it can be replaced. Any of these can turn a habitable space into a death trap in minutes. The constant awareness of air scarcity creates a particular kind of anxiety. Belters grow up knowing that they're always just a few mechanical failures away from suffocation. They learn to recognize the signs of bad air, the headaches and dizziness that come from too much carbon dioxide, the euphoria and confusion that signal oxygen deprivation. They learn to check seals, to maintain equipment, to never trust that the air they're breathing will continue to be available. Food in the belt comes primarily from hydroponic gardens and algae farms. Stations like Ceres have extensive agricultural facilities, growing vegetables in carefully controlled environments. These gardens serve multiple purposes: food production, waste reclamation, and oxygenation. Plants consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, helping to maintain the station's atmosphere while also providing nutrition. But hydroponic farming is labor-intensive and space-intensive. It requires careful management of nutrients, light, temperature, and humidity. It requires constant attention from skilled agricultural workers. And even with the best management, the variety of food available is limited. Belters eat a lot of vegetables, a lot of algae-based protein, and very little meat. Real meat from animals raised in gravity is an expensive luxury that most belters will never taste. Ganymede Station was the belt's breadbasket, a dedicated farming facility that supplied food to stations throughout the outer system. The station's agricultural domes were marvels of engineering, creating Earth-like conditions where crops could flourish. But Ganymede's destruction during the Earth-Mars belt conflict devastated the belt's food supply, creating shortages and famine that killed thousands. The economics of scarcity extend beyond the basic necessities of life. Space itself is scarce. Stations are crowded, with families living in compartments that would be considered closets on Earth. Privacy is a luxury that few can afford. Noise travels through metal corridors, smells linger in recycled air, and everyone knows everyone else's business. The wealthy live in the outer levels of stations like Ceres, where the gravity is highest and the accommodations are most spacious. The poor live deep in the rock, in the lower levels where gravity is minimal and the Coriolis effect is strongest, in spaces that are barely large enough to lie down in. This physical stratification mirrors the economic stratification. The belt's economy is controlled by corporations based on Earth and Mars. Companies like Tyco Manufacturing, Clean, and others own the stations, the ships, the infrastructure. They employ belters at wages that keep them perpetually in debt, perpetually dependent. A miner might work for years without ever getting out of debt to the company store, paying inflated prices for food, water, and air, while earning credits that never quite cover expenses. The Outer Planets Alliance emerged from this economic exploitation. The OPA started as a labor union, fighting for better wages and working conditions. It evolved into a political movement, demanding independence and self-determination for the belt. But the OPA is fractured, with different factions pursuing different goals through different methods. Some are legitimate political organizations working within the system to improve belters' lives. Others are terrorists, using violence to strike back at the inner planets. Still others are criminal enterprises, using the OPA's name to justify piracy and extortion. This fragmentation reflects the belt's fundamental economic reality. There's no unified belt economy. Each station, each ship, each family is essentially independent, connected to others through trade and shared culture, but not through any central authority. This makes collective action difficult. It's hard to organize a strike when the strikers might run out of air before the corporation gives in. It's hard to build a unified political movement when communication between stations takes hours and travel takes days. The scarcity economy creates a particular kind of person. Belters are resourceful, able to repair equipment with whatever materials are at hand, to improvise solutions to problems that would stump Earth engineers. They're careful, knowing that carelessness can kill not just themselves, but everyone around them. They're communal, understanding that survival depends on cooperation, on sharing resources, on helping each other through the hard times. But scarcity also creates desperation. It creates people willing to take enormous risks for small rewards, willing to work in dangerous conditions for poverty wages, willing to do things they're not proud of to keep their families alive. It creates a black market where anything can be bought if you have the credits, where stolen goods flow freely, where the line between legitimate business and crime is blurry at best. The economics of scarcity also create resentment. Belters watch as they mine the resources that make Earth and Mars wealthy, as they risk their lives to extract minerals and ice, as they live in poverty while the inner planets live in luxury. They see Earth, with its 14 billion people, with its oceans and forests and breathable atmosphere, and they wonder why Earth needs the belt's water when they have so much. They see Mars, with its terraforming projects and military might, and they wonder why Mars gets to build a new world while Belters are stuck in the rocks. This resentment fuels the independence movement. It drives young Belters to join the OPA, to paint the split circle symbol on walls, to dream of a day when the belt controls its own destiny. It creates a culture of resistance, of pride in being Belter, of refusing to bow to the inner planet's authority. But it also creates division, as some Belters collaborate with Earth and Mars, working for the corporations, enforcing the inner planet's laws, choosing personal survival over collective liberation. The economics of scarcity are the economics of survival. Every decision is a calculation of resources versus needs, of risks versus rewards. Every day is a struggle to maintain the delicate balance that keeps air flowing, water recycling, food growing. It's an exhausting way to live, but it's the only way Belters know. They've built a civilization in the harshest environment humanity has ever attempted to colonize, and they've done it with almost no support from the inner planets. That's something to be proud of, even as it's something to resent. Chapter 4. The Culture of the Belt. Culture emerges from shared experience, from common challenges and collective responses to those challenges. Belt culture is shaped by scarcity, by isolation, by the constant presence of death, and by the resentment of being treated as second-class citizens by the inner planets. It's a culture that values self-reliance and community in equal measure, that celebrates survival while mourning those who don't survive, that looks to the future while being trapped in an eternal present of just getting by. Language is one of the most distinctive aspects of Belt culture. Belter Creole, or Lang Belta, is a patois that emerged from the mixing of languages spoken by the Belt's original settlers. It incorporates elements of English, Spanish, Mandarin, French, and dozens of other Earth languages, creating something entirely new. The grammar is simplified, the vocabulary is practical, and the sound is musical, with a rhythm that reflects the multicultural origins of its speakers. For educated Belters, or those who regularly deal with Earthers and Martians, Lang Belta can be toned down, made more comprehensible to outsiders. But in the deep belt, among those who rarely interact with the inner planets, the language becomes almost impenetrable to non-Belters. It's a marker of identity, a way of signaling who belongs and who doesn't. Speaking Lang Belta is a political act, a refusal to conform to Earth's linguistic dominance. The language also includes a rich vocabulary of gestures and hand signals. In space, where you might be in a vacuum suit, unable to speak, or where noise might make verbal communication impossible, nonverbal communication becomes essential. Belters develop an elaborate system of hand signs that can convey complex ideas without words. These gestures are so ingrained that Belters use them even when they could speak, adding a physical dimension to their communication that Earthers lack. Tattoos are another important cultural marker. Many Belters have tattoos around their necks, mimicking the burn scars that older Belters carry from wearing cheap, poorly fitted vacuum suits. These scars were once a mark of shame, evidence of poverty and desperation, but younger Belters have reclaimed them, turning them into symbols of pride. The tattoos say, "We are Belters. We survive what would kill you. We wear our hardships as badges of honor." The OPA split circle symbol is ubiquitous in the belt. It's painted on walls, tattooed on skin, worn as jewelry, displayed on ships. The symbol represents the belt's division from the inner planets, the split between those who live in gravity wells and those who live in the dark. It's a symbol of resistance, of identity, of belonging to something larger than yourself. Even Belters who don't actively support the OPA often display the symbol because it represents Belt culture more than any specific political organization. Music in the Belt tends toward the melancholic and defiant. Songs about lost loves, about ships that never came home, about the beauty of the stars and the cruelty of the void. There's a tradition of work songs, rhythmic chants that help coordinate labor in zero-G environments. There's also a thriving underground music scene, with bands that play in station bars and ship holds, their lyrics often explicitly political, calling for independence or condemning the inner planet's exploitation. Food culture in the Belt is necessarily limited by what can be grown or synthesized, but Belters have developed their own cuisine, making the most of limited ingredients. Noodle dishes are common, easy to prepare and eat in low gravity. Algae is processed into various forms, from protein bars to something resembling meat. Spices are precious, used sparingly to add flavor to otherwise bland meals. A good cook is highly valued in Belt communities. Someone who can make recycled protein taste like something worth eating. Alcohol is both common and problematic in the belt. It's easy to produce through fermentation, requiring only sugar, yeast, and time. Many stations have illegal stills, producing liquor that ranges from merely bad to actively poisonous. Drinking is a way to cope with the stress of belt life, to forget for a few hours that you're living in a metal can surrounded by vacuum. But alcoholism is a serious problem, contributing to accidents, violence, and family breakdown. Family structures in the belt are often non-traditional by Earth standards. The nuclear family of 2 parents and children is less common than extended family networks or chosen families of unrelated individuals who support each other. This makes sense in an environment where survival depends on cooperation. A ship crew becomes a family. A work gang becomes a family. Neighbors in a station corridor become a family. Blood relationships matter less than loyalty and mutual support. Pregnancy and childbirth in the belt are complicated by low gravity. Belter women struggle with pregnancy as abdominal and uterine muscles atrophy from underuse in low-G environments. Labor is lengthy, painful, and dangerous. When possible, pregnant women relocate to Ceres or Ganymede, where the spin gravity makes pregnancy more manageable. But many belters can't afford this, giving birth in 0G or minimal gravity, with all the complications that entails. Infant mortality is high, another tragedy that belters accept as part of their reality. Children in the belt grow up fast. There's no room for extended childhood when survival requires everyone to contribute. Kids as young as 6 or 7 are given responsibilities, helping with maintenance, tending hydroponic gardens, learning the skills they'll need to survive. Education is practical rather than theoretical, focused on engineering, agriculture, and the 1,000 small skills required to keep a station or ship running. But there's also a strong tradition of storytelling in the belt. Elders pass down stories of the early days, of the first miners who ventured into the belt, of the hardships they endured and the victories they won. These stories serve multiple purposes: entertainment, education, and cultural preservation. They remind young belters where they came from, what their ancestors sacrificed, and why the fight for independence matters. Death is a constant presence in belt culture. Accidents happen frequently in an environment where a single mistake can kill dozens of people. Memorial walls in stations list the names of those who've died, a sobering reminder of the cost of living in space. Funerals are simple affairs, often just a gathering where friends and family share memories. Bodies are typically recycled, their organic matter broken down and returned to the hydroponic systems. It's practical, but it's also symbolic. Even in death, belters contribute to their community's survival. This proximity to death creates a particular attitude toward life. Belters tend to be fatalistic. accepting that they might die at any moment through no fault of their own. But they're also fiercely committed to living fully in whatever time they have. They form deep friendships quickly, love intensely, and fight passionately for what they believe in. There's no time for half measures when you might not see tomorrow. The relationship between belt culture and the inner planets is complex and fraught. Belters consume Earth media, watch Earth entertainment, follow Earth fashions, even as they resent Earth's dominance. There's a love-hate relationship with Earth culture, a desire to be part of the broader human civilization, combined with anger at being treated as inferior. Mars is viewed with less hostility, but also less interest. Martians are seen as fellow colonists, people who also left Earth behind, but they're also seen as having sold out, as having become just another power exploiting the belt. This cultural tension creates identity conflicts, especially for Belters who work closely with Earthers or Martians. Are they betraying their people by cooperating with the inner planets? Or are they being pragmatic, doing what's necessary to survive? These questions don't have easy answers, and they create divisions within belt communities. Sports and recreation in the belt are adapted to the low-gravity environment. There are games played in zero-G, requiring three-dimensional thinking and precise control of momentum. There's also slingshotting, a dangerous sport where pilots use gravity assists from planets and moons to achieve incredible speeds with minimal fuel use. It's reckless and often fatal, but it's also a way for young Belters to prove their skill and courage. Art in the belt tends toward the functional. Decorating a ship or station compartment is a way to claim space, to make a sterile environment feel like home. Murals are common, often depicting Earth landscapes that the artists have never seen, or abstract designs that play with the three-dimensional nature of zero-G space. Sculpture is less common, as materials are scarce, but some Belters create art from salvaged ship parts or asteroid fragments. Belt culture is ultimately a culture of resilience. It's been forged in the harshest conditions humanity has ever faced, shaped by scarcity and danger, and the constant awareness that the void is waiting to kill you. But it's also a culture of hope, of belief that things can be better, that the belt can be free, that Belters can control their own destiny. This tension between harsh reality and hopeful aspiration defines belt culture, creating a people who are simultaneously pragmatic and idealistic, hardened and hopeful, survivors and dreamers. Chapter 5: The Politics of Independence. The Outer Planets Alliance didn't start as a revolutionary organization. It began as a labor union, a collective effort by Belt workers to negotiate better wages and working conditions from the corporations that employed them. But labor organizing in space is complicated by the same factors that make everything in the belt complicated: distance, isolation, and the constant threat of death. A strike on Earth might inconvenience a company. A strike in the belt could kill everyone involved. If dock workers refuse to unload supply ships, the station runs out of food and water. If miners refuse to work, they still need air and heat, resources that require functioning infrastructure. The corporations know this, and they use it as leverage. Threaten to strike, and the company threatens to cut off your air. It's a brutal calculus that makes traditional labor organizing nearly impossible. The OPA emerged from this impossible situation as a more radical alternative to failed union efforts. If negotiation wouldn't work, if strikes were suicide, then perhaps violence was the answer. The OPA began targeting corporate assets, sabotaging equipment, attacking supply ships, making it more expensive for the corporations to maintain their exploitation than to negotiate. It was terrorism by any definition, but to many Belters, it was justified resistance against an oppressive system. But the OPA was never a unified organization. It couldn't be, given the belt's geography and the difficulty of communication and coordination across millions of kilometers. Different stations, different ships, different communities developed their own OPA factions, each with its own leadership, its own goals, its own methods. Some remained focused on labor issues, fighting for better pay and safer working conditions. Others became explicitly political, demanding independence and self-governance for the belt. Still others devolved into criminal enterprises, using the OPA name to justify piracy and extortion. This fragmentation created a problem of legitimacy. When an OPA faction attacked an Earthship, was it a legitimate act of resistance or terrorism? When an OPA leader negotiated with Earth or Mars, did they represent the belt or just their own faction? There was no way to know, no central authority that could speak for all Belters. This made it easy for Earth and Mars to dismiss the OPA as criminals, while also making it difficult for the OPA to achieve its political goals. Fred Johnson, the butcher of Anderson Station, became one of the OPA's most important leaders, despite or perhaps because of his Earth origins. Johnson was a UN Marine colonel who led the assault on Anderson Station, a belt station that had declared independence. The assault was supposed to be a surgical strike against armed insurgents. Instead, it became a massacre, with hundreds of civilians killed. Johnson was haunted by what he'd done, eventually defecting to the OPA and using his military expertise and Earth connections to build the OPA into a more effective organization. Under Johnson's leadership, the OPA began to function more
like a government than a terrorist organization. He established Tycho Station as the OPA's headquarters, using its manufacturing capabilities to build a fleet. He negotiated with Earth and Mars as an equal, demanding recognition of the belt's rights. He tried to unite the fractious OPA factions under a common banner, with mixed success. Some factions accepted his leadership, seeing him as the belt's best hope for achieving independence. Others rejected him as an Earth spy, a false belter who could never truly understand their struggle. The political situation was further complicated by the fact that Earth and Mars had their own interests in the belt. Earth needed the belt's resources, particularly water and minerals. Mars needed the belt's shipyards and manufacturing facilities for its terraforming project. Neither inner planet wanted the belt to become independent, as that would threaten their access to resources they considered essential. This created a three-way power struggle, with Earth and Mars competing for influence in the belt, while also trying to prevent belt independence. They played OPA factions against each other, supporting moderates who would negotiate, while crushing radicals who demanded immediate independence. They used economic pressure, threatening to cut off trade or impose sanctions. They used military force, sending warships to protect belt stations, which really meant occupying them and ensuring compliance. The belt's lack of military power was a major obstacle to independence. Earth had the United Nations Navy, one of the most powerful military forces in human history. Mars had the Martian Congressional Republic Navy, smaller than Earth's fleet but more technologically advanced. The belt had whatever ships the OPA could steal, salvage, or build. Most belt ships were converted freighters or mining vessels, armed with whatever weapons could be scrounged. They were no match for purpose-built warships in direct combat. This military imbalance forced the OPA to adopt asymmetric tactics. They couldn't win a conventional war, so they didn't fight one. Instead, they used hit-and-run attacks, sabotage, and terrorism to make occupation expensive and dangerous. They hid among the civilian population, making it difficult for Earth and Mars to target them without killing innocents. They used the belt's vast distances to their advantage, striking and then disappearing into the black before retaliation could arrive. But these tactics came with costs. Every OPA attack gave Earth and Mars justification for crackdowns, for increased military presence, for treating all belters as potential terrorists. Innocent belters suffered for the OPA's actions, facing harassment, detention, and violence from interplanet security forces. This created a cycle of violence and retaliation that made peace increasingly difficult to achieve. The political divisions within the belt mirrored the divisions within the OPA. Some belters supported
Independence at any cost, willing to endure hardship and violence to achieve freedom. Others prioritized survival, believing that cooperation with Earth and Mars was the only way to ensure that belters had food, water, and air. Still others were simply trying to get by, uninterested in politics, focused on keeping their families alive. These divisions created tensions within belt communities. Families were split between OPA supporters and collaborators. Friends became enemies over political disagreements. Violence between different factions was common, with OPA radicals attacking those they saw as traitors, and corporate security forces attacking anyone suspected of OPA sympathies. The dream of belt independence was complicated by practical realities. Even if the belt achieved political independence, it would still be economically dependent on the inner planets. The belt couldn't feed itself without Ganymede's agricultural output. It couldn't maintain its infrastructure without parts and materials from Earth and Mars. It couldn't defend itself against military action from the inner planets. Independence might mean freedom from direct political control, but it wouldn't mean true self-sufficiency. Some OPA leaders recognized this and advocated for a more moderate approach, not complete independence, but greater autonomy within a solar system-wide political structure. They wanted the belt to have representation in Earth's government, to have a say in decisions that affected Belters' lives, to have control over their own resources and economy. This was a more achievable goal than complete independence, but it was also less satisfying to those who wanted nothing to do with Earth and Mars. The politics of independence were further complicated by the discovery of the protomolecule and the opening of the ring gates to thousands of new worlds. Suddenly, the belt's strategic importance changed. If humanity could colonize new planets, if there were new sources of resources beyond the solar system, then the belt's role as the primary source of minerals and water became less critical. This could be an opportunity for belt independence, as Earth and Mars might be willing to let the belt go if they had alternatives. Or it could be a disaster, as the belt's economy collapsed without demand for its products. The political situation remained fluid, dangerous, and unpredictable. The belt's future was uncertain, caught between the dream of independence and the reality of dependence, between the desire for freedom and the need for survival. Belters continued to fight, to negotiate, to hope, and to die, all in pursuit of a goal that might be impossible to achieve. But the fight itself had become part of belt identity, a defining characteristic of what it meant to be a belter. Whether they won or lost, whether they achieved independence or remained under inner planet control, Belters would continue to resist, because resistance was all they had. Chapter 6: Daily Life in the Dark. Understanding the politics and economics of the belt is important, but it doesn't capture what it actually feels like to live there. To truly understand belt life, you need to follow a belter through their day, to see the small details that make up existence in the dark. Let's follow Mara, a dock worker on Ceres Station. She lives in the lower levels, in a compartment that's barely large enough for her sleeping bag and a small storage locker. The walls are bare metal, cold to the touch, covered with a thin layer of condensation from the recycled air. There's no window, no natural light, just a flickering LED panel that provides barely enough illumination to see by. Mara wakes to the sound of her alarm, a harsh buzzing that cuts through the ambient noise of the station. The noise never stops on Ceres, a constant background hum of machinery, ventilation, and the muffled sounds of thousands of people living in close proximity. She's learned to sleep through it, but it's always there, a reminder that she's living inside a machine that could fail at any moment. She doesn't shower. Her water ration for the week is already half gone, and it's only Tuesday. Instead, she uses a damp cloth to wipe down her face and hands, removing the worst of yesterday's grime. The cloth comes away gray, and she makes a mental note to do laundry soon. Her clothes are stiff with dried sweat and dust, but they'll have to do for another few days. Breakfast is a protein bar made from processed algae and a cup of recycled water. The bar tastes like cardboard with a faint chemical aftertaste, but it provides the calories she needs for a day of physical labor. The water tastes flat, slightly metallic, nothing like the fresh water she's seen in Earth videos, but it's wet and it's safe, and that's all that matters. She leaves her compartment, sealing the door behind her. The corridor outside is narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other. The walls are covered with graffiti, layers upon layers of tags, messages, and OPA symbols. The floor is gritty with dust that's tracked in from the docks, and the air smells of machine oil, unwashed bodies, and the faint chemical scent of the recyclers. The gravity here, deep in the station, is noticeably lower than in the upper levels. Mara moves with the easy grace of someone who's spent their entire life in low G, pushing off walls to change direction, using momentum rather than fighting it. An earther would stumble and flail, but Mara barely thinks about it. This is normal for her. She takes a tube train to the docks, standing in a crowded car with dozens of other workers. No one talks much. Everyone is tired, focused on the day ahead, conserving energy for the work to come. The train accelerates and decelerates with stomach-lurching suddenness, and Mara automatically adjusts her stance to compensate. The Coriolis effect is strong here, and she can feel it in the way the train seems to curve even though the track is straight. The docks are a vast, open space, one of the largest areas on Ceres. Ships of all sizes are berthed here, from small prospecting vessels to massive freighters. The ceiling is hundreds of meters overhead, studded with lights and gantries. The floor is a maze of cargo containers, loading equipment and workers, moving with purposeful urgency. Mara's job is to unload cargo from incoming ships. It's physical work, requiring strength and endurance despite the low gravity. Cargo containers can mass several tons, and while they're easy to move in low G, they're also easy to lose control of. A container that gets away from you can crush someone against a wall or damage expensive equipment. Mara has seen both happen, has attended funerals for co-workers who made one mistake and paid for it with their lives. She works with a crew of 5 others, coordinating their movements through hand signals and short verbal commands. They've worked together for years, know each other's rhythms and capabilities. Trust is essential in this work. If someone says they have a container secured, you have to believe them. If they say they need help, you have to respond immediately. Hesitation can kill. The work is monotonous but requires constant attention. Unseal the cargo bay, attach the grapples, guide the container out, move it to the designated storage area, secure it, repeat. Hour after hour, container after container. Mara's muscles ache. Her hands are sore from gripping tools, and her back hurts from the constant twisting and reaching. But she doesn't complain. This job pays better than most, and she needs the credits. Lunch is another protein bar and water, eaten quickly in a break room that's too small for the number of workers trying to use it. Mara sits on the floor, her back against a wall. and closes her eyes for a few minutes. The noise is overwhelming. Dozens of conversations in Lang Belta, laughter, arguments, the clatter of tools and equipment. But she's learned to find moments of peace even in chaos. The afternoon is more of the same. More containers, more coordination, more physical labor. A ship arrives with a load of ice from the rings of Saturn, and Mara's crew is assigned to process it. This is delicate work, as the ice must be carefully transferred to the station's water processing facility without contamination. They work in vacuum suits, moving through the ship's cargo bay in the silence of space, communicating through radio. Working in vacuum is always dangerous. A suit breach means death in seconds. A failed seal, a torn glove, a cracked faceplate. Any of these can kill you before help can arrive. Mara checks her suit 3 times before leaving the airlock, running through the safety checklist that's been drilled into her since childhood. She trusts her equipment, but she also knows that equipment fails, and when it does, there's no second chance. The ice is beautiful, great chunks of frozen water that sparkle in the work lights. Mara allows herself a moment to appreciate it. This substance that's so precious, so essential to life. Then she gets back to work, guiding the ice chunks through the transfer system, ensuring that each one is properly logged and accounted for. The shift ends after 10 hours. Mara is exhausted, her body aching, her mind numb from the repetitive work. She returns her equipment, clocks out, and heads back to her compartment. The tube train is less crowded now, as different shifts operate on different schedules. She finds a seat and closes her eyes, letting the motion of the train lull her into a half-doze. Dinner is noodles from a street vendor, purchased with precious credits, but worth it for the taste of something that isn't algae. The vendor operates out of a converted cargo container, serving food to workers as they pass by. The noodles are spicy, flavored with synthetic spices that approximate Earth cuisine. They're delicious, and Mara savors every bite. She stops at a bar on the way home, a small establishment carved into the station's rock. The bar is crowded, filled with dock workers, miners, and ship crews. The air is thick with smoke from illegal cigarettes, and the noise is deafening. Mara orders a beer, locally brewed and barely drinkable. But it's alcohol, and that's what matters. She sits at the bar, nursing her drink, watching the crowd. There's a fight in the corner. 2 men arguing over something, their voices rising. The bartender moves to intervene, but the fight breaks up on its own, the men separating and returning to their drinks. Violence is common in the belt, a release valve for the constant stress and frustration of daily life. A friend joins her, another dock worker named Chen. They talk about work, about the latest OPA actions, about rumors of new opportunities on the ring stations. Chen is thinking about leaving Ceres, trying to get a berth on a ship heading through the rings to one of the new colony worlds. It's dangerous, he admits, but it's also a chance for something better than this endless grind. Mara understands the appeal. She's thought about leaving too, about finding a ship that needs crew, about seeing something beyond Ceres' metal corridors. But she's also afraid. The belt is harsh, but it's familiar. The unknown beyond the rings might be worse. So she stays, working her job, living her life, hoping that someday things will get better. She finishes her beer and heads home. The corridors are quieter now, most people already in their compartments. She passes a memorial wall, stops to read the names of those who've died recently. There are too many, always too many. She recognizes some of them, people she worked with, people she knew. She says a silent prayer for them, though she's not sure who she's praying to. Back in her compartment, she strips off her clothes and climbs into her sleeping bag. The metal walls are cold, the air is stale, and she can hear her neighbors through the thin barriers. But she's home, such as it is. She's survived another day. Tomorrow she'll do it again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until something changes, or until she joins the names on the memorial wall. This is daily life in the belt. It's not heroic or dramatic. It's just survival, day after day, in an environment that's constantly trying to kill you. It's work and exhaustion, and small pleasures stolen from the grinding routine. It's community and isolation, hope and despair, all mixed together in a life that's harder than most humans have ever had to endure. But it's also life. Mara is alive. She has friends. She has work that matters. She has dreams of something better. She's a belter, and that means something. It means she's tough. She's resourceful. She's a survivor. It means she's part of a culture that's carved out existence in the harshest environment humanity has ever faced. And that's worth something, even if the inner planets don't recognize it. Chapter 7. The Technology of Survival. Life in the belt is only possible because of technology. Every breath, every drop of water, every moment of warmth exists because of machines that convert the hostile environment of space into something humans can survive in. Understanding belt life requires understanding the technology that makes it possible, and the constant maintenance required to keep that technology functioning. The most critical technology is life support. Every station and ship must maintain a breathable atmosphere, and this requires a complex system of recyclers, filters, and reserves. Air recyclers remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and replenish oxygen. The most common method uses chemical scrubbers, similar to those used in submarines, passing air through filters that absorb CO2 and release O2. These filters must be regularly replaced, and the chemical reactions that power them require inputs that must be constantly replenished. More advanced systems use electrolysis to split water into hydrogen and oxygen, providing a renewable source of breathable air. But this requires significant energy and a steady supply of water, both of which are precious in the belt. Most stations use a combination of methods, balancing efficiency against resource availability. The recyclers aren't perfect. They can't capture every molecule of oxygen, can't remove every contaminant. Over time, the air quality degrades, becoming stale and slightly toxic. Stations must periodically vent their atmosphere and replace it with fresh air from reserves, a process that's expensive and risky. A failure during venting can leave a station without breathable air, killing everyone aboard. Water recyclers are equally critical. They process wastewater from showers, toilets, and industrial processes, filtering out contaminants and producing potable water. The technology is similar to reverse osmosis systems used on Earth, but more advanced and more efficient. Even so, no recycler is 100% efficient. There's always loss, always water that can't be recovered. The lost water must be replaced from reserves, which are replenished by ice haulers. These ships travel to the outer system, to the rings of Saturn or the moons of Jupiter, where they harvest ice and bring it back to the belt. It's dangerous work, requiring precise navigation and the ability to process ice in zero-G. But it's essential work, as without it, the belt would run out of water in months. Solid waste recyclers break down organic matter, converting it into components that can be reused. Human waste, food scraps, dead plants from hydroponic gardens, even dead bodies, all go into the recyclers. The organic matter is broken down into basic elements: carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and others. These elements are then used to fertilize hydroponic gardens, creating a closed loop where waste becomes food, becomes waste again. This recycling is necessary but also psychologically difficult. Belters know that the water they drink was someone's urine yesterday, that the vegetables they eat were grown in soil fertilized with human waste. It's a constant reminder of how precarious their existence is, how dependent they are on technology to transform the disgusting into the life-sustaining. Power generation in the belt primarily relies on fusion reactors. These reactors use hydrogen isotopes, typically deuterium and helium-3, to produce enormous amounts of energy with minimal waste. The technology is mature and reliable, but it requires fuel that must be mined from gas giants or produced through other processes. Stations like Ceres have large fusion reactors that provide power for the entire population. Smaller stations and ships use smaller reactors or rely on solar panels, though solar power becomes less effective the farther you get from the sun. The Epstein drive revolutionized space travel by providing efficient, high-thrust propulsion. Before the Epstein drive, travel between planets took years and required enormous amounts of fuel. The Epstein drive made it possible to travel from Earth to Jupiter in weeks rather than years, opening up the outer system to colonization. The drive works by using fusion reactions to heat reaction mass to extreme temperatures, then expelling it at high velocity. This provides constant acceleration, allowing ships to reach speeds that were previously impossible. But the Epstein drive also creates problems. the constant acceleration produces thrust gravity, which can be uncomfortable or dangerous, depending on the intensity. High G burns, where ships accelerate at multiple Gs, can injure or kill crew members who aren't properly secured. Belters, with their fragile bones and weak cardiovascular systems, are particularly vulnerable to high G maneuvers. They must use juice, a cocktail of drugs that helps their bodies cope with the stress. But even with juice, prolonged high G burns can cause lasting damage. Communication in the belt is complicated by distance and the speed of light. Radio signals travel at light speed, which sounds fast until you realize that light takes minutes to travel between planets. A message from Ceres to Earth takes about 20 minutes to arrive, and another 20 for the response to come back. This makes real-time conversation impossible over interplanetary distances. Instead, people send recorded messages, waiting hours or days for responses. This communication lag affects everything from business to personal relationships. You can't have a casual conversation with someone on another planet. You can't make quick decisions that require input from multiple locations. Everything must be planned in advance with contingencies for different possible responses. It's frustrating and isolating. Another way that distance shapes belt life. Within stations, communication is easier. Local networks allow real-time voice and video communication, though bandwidth is limited and often expensive. Most belters rely on text messages or voice-only calls to save on bandwidth costs. Video calls are a luxury, reserved for special occasions or business that requires visual confirmation. Medical technology in the belt is advanced but unevenly distributed. The wealthy have access to cutting-edge treatments, including bone density enhancement therapy, cardiovascular strengthening, and genetic modifications. The poor make do with basic medical care, often provided by undertrained practitioners using outdated equipment. Serious injuries or illnesses often mean death, as the cost of treatment exceeds what most belters can afford. The lack of gravity complicates medical care in unique ways. Surgery in 0G is difficult, as blood and other fluids don't behave normally. Doctors must use specialized equipment to contain fluids and prevent contamination. Recovery from surgery is also complicated, as the body heals differently in low gravity. Bones don't knit as strongly, muscles atrophy faster, and infections are more likely. Pregnancy and childbirth, as mentioned earlier, are particularly challenging. Medical technology can help, but it can't fully compensate for the lack of gravity. Many belter women choose not to have children, knowing the risks involved. Those who do often face complications that would be minor on Earth, but are life-threatening in space. Manufacturing in the belt relies on advanced fabrication technology. 3D printers can create complex parts from raw materials, allowing stations to produce much of what they need locally. This is essential as shipping parts from Earth or Mars is expensive and time-consuming. But 3D printers require feedstock, raw materials that must be mined and processed. This creates a dependency on the belt's mining industry, which in turn creates economic leverage for those who control the mines. Tycho Station represents the pinnacle of belt manufacturing capability. Its massive construction dome can build ships up to the size of generation ships, using advanced robotics and human labor. The station's construction waldos, enormous robotic arms, can manipulate components weighing thousands of tons with precision. This capability makes Tycho strategically important, as it's one of the few places in the solar system that can build capital ships. But most belt manufacturing is much more modest. Small fabrication shops produce parts for ships and stations,
Repair facilities keep aging equipment running, and salvage operations recover materials from derelict ships and abandoned stations. It's an economy built on making do, on repairing rather than replacing, on squeezing every last bit of utility out of equipment that should have been retired decades ago. The technology of survival in the belt is impressive, but it's also fragile. Every system has failure modes. Every machine can break. Every process can go wrong. Belters live with the constant awareness that their lives depend on technology that's often old, poorly maintained, and operating at the edge of its design parameters. They become experts at improvisation, at fixing things with whatever materials are at hand, at keeping systems running long past their intended lifespan. This technological dependence creates a particular kind of anxiety. You can't escape into nature when you're stressed, because there is no nature. You can't take a walk outside because outside is vacuum. You're trapped inside machines, breathing recycled air, drinking recycled water, eating food grown under artificial lights. It's a profoundly unnatural way to live, and it takes a psychological toll that's hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. Yet Belters have adapted to this technological existence. They've learned to trust the machines that keep them alive, while also maintaining a healthy skepticism about their reliability. They've developed a culture that values technical knowledge, that respects engineers and mechanics, that understands that survival depends on keeping the technology running. In the belt, a good engineer is worth more than a good politician, because the engineer can keep you alive while the politician can only make promises. Conclusion: the future of the belt. As we drift back from the cold darkness of the belt, back toward the warmth and light of the inner planets, it's worth reflecting on what we've learned about this harsh frontier and the people who call it home. The belt is a place of contradictions, beautiful and deadly, isolating and communal, hopeless and hopeful. It's a place where humanity has pushed the boundaries of what's possible, creating civilization in an environment that should be uninhabitable. The Belters themselves are a testament to human adaptability and resilience. They've transformed themselves, physically and culturally, to survive in conditions that would kill an Earther in minutes. They've built a society from nothing, creating art and music and language in the darkness between the planets. They fought for
recognition, for rights, for the simple acknowledgement that they're human beings deserving of dignity and respect. But the belt's future remains uncertain. The opening of the ring gates to thousands of new worlds changes everything. If humanity can colonize planets with breathable atmospheres and natural gravity, why would anyone choose to live in the belt? The economic justification for belt settlements may disappear as new sources of resources become available. The belt could become obsolete, its population dwindling as people leave for better opportunities elsewhere. Or the belt could become something new, with the inner planets focused on colonizing new worlds. The belt might finally achieve the independence it's fought for. Belters could control their own destiny, building a society that reflects their values rather than serving the interests of Earth and Mars. The belt could become a hub for interstellar trade, a waypoint between the old solar system and the new colonies. The technology that makes belt life possible continues to improve, better recyclers, more efficient fusion reactors, advanced medical treatments that could allow belters to visit planets without dying. These advances could make belt life less harsh, less dangerous, more sustainable. Or they could simply make it easier for the inner planets to exploit belt resources without needing to worry about the people who live there. The culture of the belt will persist, regardless of what happens politically or economically. The language, the music, the stories, the shared identity of being belter. These things have taken root too deeply to be easily erased. Even if the belt's population declines, even if the major stations are abandoned, there will always be people who choose to live in the dark, who prefer the freedom of space to the constraints of planetary life. The belt represents humanity's first true step into space, the first time we've created permanent settlements beyond Earth and its moon. It's a proof of concept, a demonstration that humans can live anywhere if they're determined enough, resourceful enough, and willing to pay the price. The lessons learned in the belt about recycling, about closed-loop life support, about surviving in hostile environments. These lessons will be essential as humanity spreads to the stars. But the belt is also a warning. It shows what happens when economic exploitation is allowed to continue unchecked, when a population is treated as a resource rather than as people. It shows the cost of inequality, of treating some humans as less valuable than others. The belt's poverty, its suffering, its constant struggle for survival, these are not inevitable consequences of living in space. They're the result of political and economic choices made by those in power. As we end this exploration of belt life, remember that the belters are not just characters in a story. They represent real questions about humanity's future in space. How will we organize ourselves when we leave Earth? Will we recreate the same inequalities and injustices that plague us on our home planet? Or will we build something better, something more just, something that recognizes the inherent dignity of all people, regardless of where they were born? The belt is a mirror, reflecting both the best and worst of humanity. It shows our incredible capacity for adaptation and survival, our ability to create beauty and meaning in the harshest conditions. But it also shows our capacity for cruelty, for exploitation, for treating other humans as means rather than ends. The future of the belt and the future of humanity in space remains unwritten. It will be determined by the choices we make, the values we uphold, the kind of civilization we choose to build. Will we learn from the belt's example, or will we repeat its mistakes on a larger scale as we spread to new worlds? These are questions worth pondering as you drift off to sleep tonight. Think about the belters, living their lives in the darkness between the planets, fighting for recognition, for rights, for a future that's better than their present. Think about what it means to be human when your body has been transformed by your environment, when your culture has been shaped by scarcity and danger, when your very existence is an act of defiance against the void. The belt is more than just a setting in a science fiction story. It's a thought experiment about human nature, about what we become when we're pushed to our limits, about what we're capable of when survival requires us to transcend our limitations. It's a reminder that humanity's future in space will be shaped not by technology alone, but by the choices we make about how to treat each other, how to distribute resources, how to build societies that are just and sustainable. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the belt. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Expanse's most fascinating setting, please like and subscribe. Until next time, remember, in space, no one can hear you scream, but that doesn't mean you should stop fighting for a better future. Stay safe out there, and may your recyclers never fail.